The sentencing of police officer Lewis Edwards, who is 24, has just been announced, where he was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 12 years for over 160 child sex offences, where he groomed and manipulated girls between the ages of 10 and 16. Now, he committed these offences between November of 2020 and February of 2023, and all but one of his victims were contacted after he joined the police in January of 2021. Now, in this video, I'm just going to briefly talk about the facts of this case. I'm then going to move on to talk about the sentencing and explain what a life sentence with a minimum term of 12 years means and how the judge came to the determination that that was the appropriate sentence. And then I'm just going to talk briefly about the refusal of Edwards to attend his sentencing hearing and what the government are proposing to do to deal with those individuals who refuse to attend their sentencing hearings and deny victims the opportunity to have the defendant hear how their offending has impacted on them. In terms of the facts of this case, Lewis Edwards joined the South Wales Constabulary in January of 2021, and his offending spanned the period November 2020 up until February of 2023 when he was arrested. Now, his method of operating was to use the social media app Snapchat to engage in video conversations with girls under the age of 16. He would then persuade or convince the girls to show intimate parts of themselves, which he would then secretly record using a third-party app on his phone. He would then use these secret recordings or photographs of these young girls to then blackmail them into sending further images of themselves. Now, in addition to this, he was also downloading a significant amount of indecent images of children. With regards to Edwards' arrest, South Wales Police began investigating when it received intelligence about suspicious online activity involving the downloading of child abuse images from the dark web. Edwards was identified as the perpetrator and also as a serving police officer on the force. Now, the youngest victim involved in Edwards' offending was just 10 years old at the time, and he was charged with over 160 offences. Notably, he pleaded guilty to 25 counts of inciting a child to engage in sexual activity, 6 counts of making a child watch a sex act, and 14 counts of unwarranted demand of indecent images of children with menace, and then a further 9 counts of making indecent images of children, categories A, B, and C. Following his guilty plea, Edwards was remanded into custody, with his sentencing hearing set to begin on the 23rd of October at Cardiff Crown Court. At his sentencing hearing, Edwards refused to appear in court for his sentencing, instead choosing to remain within his prison cell, so he would not have heard the victim impact statements from those young girls who he groomed and manipulated into sending indecent images of them. Now, in terms of sentencing, the judge, amongst a number of sentences given the 160 offences that Edwards had pleaded guilty to, sentenced him to 13 life sentences for the most severe offences that he had pleaded guilty to, with a minimum term of 12 years. What that means in practice is that after 12 years, Edwards will be eligible to be considered for release by the parole board. Now, this does not mean that he will be automatically released by the parole board. It means this is the earliest point at which he can make an application to the parole board to be considered for release. If they do not deem that Edwards is safe to be released, given the gravity of his offending, then he will not be released. Of course, he will be eligible to make further applications to the parole board as he progresses through his sentence. If he is released, then the life sentence part of his sentence will kick in, and what that effectively means is that he will be on licence for the rest of his life and will be subject to a number of conditions, which I would expect to include things like not being permitted to have any devices that would allow connectivity to the internet, not being allowed to be around or work with children under the age of 16, and be excluded from certain areas such as schools or youth clubs. He will also be required to sign the sexual notification requirements, or the sex offenders register as it's sometimes known, and he will be on that register for the remainder of his life. Now, if he breaches any of the conditions that he is set by the parole board, then he can be recalled to prison at any time. If he commits any further criminal offences which can be completely unrelated to this case, then he can also be recalled to prison, where he is likely to spend the remainder of his sentence in prison. Now, at the time of recording this video, the sentencing remarks of the judge, Tracy Lloyd Clark, who is the recorder of Cardiff, had not yet been published online, but as soon as they are, I will add them to the description to this video. But from the reporting around this case, the judge said that the offending of Edwards had caused significant harm to the victims, their siblings and their wider families, and it was clear that Edwards had gained not only sexual gratification from his offending, but also enjoyed the power and control that he had over these young girls, and his reaction to their distress can properly be described as cruel and sadistic, and that his offending was significantly aggravated by the fact that he was a serving police officer, and many of the victims and families involved in this case can be said to have lost trust in the police. Now, there's one more thing I want to touch upon in this video, and that is Edwards' refusal to attend his sentencing hearing, thereby denying his victims the opportunity to state to him how his offending has impacted them and their families. And following this and other high-profile cases, such as the case of Lucy Letby or Thomas Cashman, there have understandably been calls for the law to be changed to, in effect, force defendants into court in order to hear their sentencing hearing. Now, whilst I broadly support some method of ensuring that the victim impact statements and the sentencing remarks of the judge are heard by the defendant, I do not support any kind of physical use of force and, in effect, dragging murderers or sex offenders into court in order to hear their sentencing hearing. Now, there's a couple of reasons for this. Firstly, you are increasing the risk of physical assaults being carried out on security staff whose job it is to maintain the safety of all of those in the court. So you are putting unnecessary risk by dragging people who do not want to be there. And secondly, if you drag someone into court, then the risk of disruption to the hearing increases significantly. And the last thing you want is a victim who is telling the court in graphic detail how the behaviour of the defendant has impacted them, being shouted down and abused and being interrupted by the behaviour of the defendant. There are alternative methods, such as the prisoner appearing on a live link and being forced to listen in a room where they are muted so cannot disturb the hearing. I just simply don't agree with dragging the individual into court in order to hear the sentencing because of the risk of harm and disruption to the victims. I also have looked at the government plans to increase the sentence of offenders who refuse to appear at their sentencing hearing. And whilst that might work in certain cases as a deterrent, such as this case where 12 years as a minimum could become 16. In cases of murder where you're talking about several decades in prison, or in the case of Lucy Letby, a whole life order, the addition of years does not serve as a deterrent, or indeed as the case of Thomas Cashman where he was sentenced to 40 years, so an additional 2 years is going to make very minimal difference to that. Thanks for watching. If you do have any comments about this video or this case in general, please do put a comment down below. If you did enjoy this video, then please do consider giving it a like. And if you'd like to see more from me, then please do subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching. Take care.